I'm thinking director. Yep, that's what I want to do.
How much does a producer make?
Did you go to school? What did you study?
What's the best part about your job?
How do I get in?
Who do I need to know?
Welcome to 101, a podcast for young women interested in careers in film and TV.
We'll sit down with industry professionals, ask them your questions, and get the answers you need to know.
101. It's a beginning. Hello, listeners. Welcome to 101, a podcast. We are so excited to speak with our guest today, Nell Teare, a woman of many talents. And I think that you are going to enjoy this conversation. So let's kick it off. Welcome to 101.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be on the show with you guys.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. We start with like kind of basic questions now. So how would you define your role? Like, what do you do?
I mean, I'm a storyteller, I think is sort of the, overarching definition, but I'm a director first and foremost. That's what pays most of my bills, all of my bills. But I started in this world as an actress on the stage with my mother when I was a little girl, singing and dancing with her, and went all through school studying that musical theater, was at Tisch at Cap 21 in New York, graduated, and then started touring, doing regional productions, doing, off-Broadway stuff, and then moved to LA and was working in theater there and got more into film and television as an actor. And in 2011, my mom passed away, and it sort of opened up something, I think, because she was an actress. I wanted to continue her legacy and her dream. So I did that. But when she was gone, I sort of understood that I'd been raised in this world, and I understood how to wrap my arms around something and sort of create the space to build something, right? And I was asked to direct a one-woman show, and then that kind of kicked it off. And so for the last decade, I've been directing, and at this point, I think I'm 120 projects in, and that ranges from music video to web series to short films to commercial book trailers to feature films, and now dubbing. I've been directing a lot of dubs for Netflix and Disney Plus. It opened up this whole other world to me, and I produce most everything that I direct. So there's that element as well.
Just that small thing.
and I write. I wrote the feature film that we did in October as well. So yeah, I guess I'm that classic like megalomaniac, multi-hyphenate, insane person.
I think multi-talented, not insane, is more appropriate. Right. I'm so interested to know, you said that shift was something to do with something really personal that happened to you. Was it a moment that you just kind of knew that this was a shift that you were being called to change from being an actress to moving into directing?
It was really interesting. And it was a process. It took about a year for me to even entertain the idea, because I had, people had said, Nellie, why don't you direct? Or why don't you do this? And, and I would always say, oh no, I'm an actor. I'm not sure, no. And it was almost sometimes in my life kind of an aggressive no, which I think is really interesting to go back and look at. And my mom and I were in The Grapes of Wrath together when I was 10. I played Ruthie and she was Ma Jode. And so I remember the director being this very larger than life woman, big hair and big shoulders and just very sort of in charge. Whereas my mother was, tiny and blonde and adorable and very sort of easygoing and beloved. And so to me, that was actress, and this woman was director. And one night I was talking to a bunch of the actors after rehearsal. And remember, I'm in the 4th grade, but I'm much more like the woman who was directing. Anyway, so I'm, holding court and telling a joke or something like that. And she said to me, Nell, I think you'd be a great director one day. And I was distraught. I went home and I cried. No idea why, like it was an insult or something. And now I think about saying that to a young woman, and it would be almost the best compliment you could ever give anyone. But I think that whatever that was that I was tied to about my mom and what it meant to be an actor and to be her daughter and to be lovable, I think that was something that shifted for me. And it took about a year. And it actually started with painting. When my mom died, all I wanted to do was paint, which I think is interesting because it's within a frame. It's like creating imagery within a frame. But that was kind of the transition into it. And then a man I was dating at the time said to a friend of his, you know, Nell should direct your one woman show. And then I did, and then I was hooked. So, but it was like it was a very personal transition because it was sort of an aspect of me that I was not holding on so tightly to anymore, you know, kind of letting that go and making space. And I think when you lose a parent, that's something that happens, is that there's suddenly so much space, you know, for other things. The love is still there, obviously, but the dynamic and the definition shifts. So
Yeah.
I know that you touched a little bit on your schooling and that you went to NYU. Tish, what exactly did you study there?
I was a musical theater major at Cap 21, which was the musical theater program there when I was there, which was a conservatory. So I mean, I was in, you know, dance, acting, voice and speech, music theory, you know, I mean, everything. And then around my second year, I'd always been really interested in comparative religion, but more from a standpoint of like how it affects human beings and why we murder each other over semantics and things like that. And so I studied that through the anthropology department as a minor. It was an interesting lens to look at human beings through, to understand the stories that we, you know, hold so dear and fight so hard for, and that they are all stories that have been created by ourselves. It's kind of a little interesting way to study.
It's also cool to see actors who have backgrounds in other things and how does it affect you as an actor, like having that knowledge and those experiences.
You know, as an actor, and I continued to study. I mean, that was something I always loved school. So anything I could study and sort of understand was always very fascinating to me. And I am in love with and fascinated by human beings. So it was kind of a perfect thing, you know, to study through the anthropology department and have it be a focus that way instead of, you know, like a theological look at it, but like, how do we exist within these scenarios we've created for ourselves, these societies, these, you know, spaces. And that's exactly what you're doing as an artist. You're creating these people based on things and like learning how to excavate within a script. You know, I had a wonderful teacher who would have us write down everything we say about ourselves in the script, the character, everything the other characters say about you, and then everything that you do actionably, right? Because so often what's wonderful about a person or a character is looking at the difference between what they do and what they say, you know, and then they sort of exist as a being in between those two things, right? You kind of like look at the space between anything to get a picture of it or whatever. So I think having that background in anthropology and stories, which, you know, like dissecting these stories, I think has helped me as a director, as a writer, as an actor, and as a human being.
So, you know, you touched on being a child actor, and I'd love to know more about that and also more about how that has influenced or impacted your role as a director.
Absolutely. And I think it was a big part of my shifting into directing. You know, there's nothing, still to this day, there's nothing I love more than sitting around with a bunch of, like, at a dinner table or a living room or a theater or a green room or whatever, with a bunch of older actor artist types. Because when I was little, I would just sit and listen to these stories. But then also, you know, I shadowed on the NCIS shows, New Orleans and the Mothership in LA, the original. And two of my mentors are Jimmy Whitmore and Bethany Rooney. And they both have, I mean, like together, they have something like 500 episodes of television under their belt or something wild. Bethany came up under Bruce Paltrow, and Jimmy Whitmore's dad was James Whitmore, who was like Tony Award winning. And, you know, he was, oh my God, one of the roles I love the most of his was Brooks in Shawshank Redemption. So like these people who sort of lived in it the way I did as a kid. And there's such a reverence for what I do. There's such a respect and love for it, and the people who would want to do it and do it, because it's not for the faint of heart. You know, I mean, it is like an unbelievable amount of energy. And when you grow up in it and you watch people do that, adults do that, it sort of gets in your blood and under your skin. I mean, my mom would be on stage and I'd be sitting next to the director or the assistant director, or I'd be standing backstage with the stage hands or the stage manager. I don't know. I felt like I was a part of something. So when I got to LA and I started, you know, kind of trying to get into the television game as an actor, and was doing co-stars and little things, and then I have to go sit by myself in my trailer or like just stand around crafty. You know, you can't really go anywhere. And I thought, man, this is lonely, and I have so much more that I want to share and that I want to offer from a creative standpoint and like a collaborative standpoint. And that was one of the big things that I recognized when I was making that transition. Because as a musical theater performer, you don't have time to think about anything. Like you come on and you do a number and then you go off and you're in a quick change and then you come back. And so I felt doing that, you know, I didn't have time to be sort of lonely on a set and wanting to like contribute more or be included more. So that being a child actor is, you know, I think that was a big part of the transition, is wanting to feel more fulfilled, you know.
It sounds like a sense of community is something that you not only respect, but you really just it has such importance to you as part of the craft, because there's always, you know, there's what we do, but there's also like how we do it. And I think that's one thing that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle for some. And it sounds like it's something that's really important to you from the beginning.
Yes. I mean, it from the minute I came out, my mother says, I don't know, but you know, I was ready to do it, be an artist. What was wonderful is that my brother and sister, we all did shows together with mom. In fact, they're in my movie. They're in Bolivar because my mom had this dream that we would all make movies together at some point. And so, you know, 10 years after she was gone, I made that a reality, which was kind of great. It was very great, not kind of great. It was very great. And they play the flashback family because as I play the woman that the film is about. And so when we flash back to these things, and my mother is played by my sister and my father is played by my brother, and his children play little me and the little brother. I mean, it just kind of you feel that on screen, you know, everybody looks alike and sort of has a similar soulfulness to them. So
that must have been a really powerful moment.
Oh man, it was fantastic. Like getting that footage back was just kind of like, whoa.
If we could dive into, as a director, sort of what your day-to-day responsibilities are on a given project.
Yeah, with a film, you're sort of crafting that, you know, from the beginning. And my favorite thing to do is sit with whoever my DP is. I call her my work wife. Julia Swain and I have made a gazillion projects together, but I've also been fortunate enough to work with Alexander Krasinski, who is amazing, and so many other wonderful DPs. But at creating the feeling of the frame, you know, what it's going to look like. With Bolivar specifically, it's a very psychological piece because we're dealing with a woman who's experiencing grief. So a lot of my job there was to create a tone and a psychological experience for the audience. What are we showing them in the frame? What am I telling them viscerally? What am I giving them viscerally through all of this? You know, what will the music feel like? That kind of thing. So there's a lot of that you go into a prep, and on a smaller scale, you do that with anything. You get the synopsis, you create the lookbook, you cast the actors, and you shoot the thing, and then you hand it off to the editor with, you know, whatever the shot list is and whatever you're hoping to do with that. But that's a very like tight, succinct process, and it all expands out from there. With the dubbing, I really love to cast the series myself, because, you know, our voices, coming from a musical background, the way we resonate has a lot to do with, you know, the way our bodies are kind of put together, right? So I think it's really interesting finding actors to match each other. And sometimes it's crazy because the American actor doing the voice of, say, an Italian actor who did the original series will look so much alike, right? Because their voices are similar. So anyway, so there's a lot of stuff that goes into casting that. And then I have wonderful producers at both Netflix and Disney Plus who then, you know, they set up the times and they kind of figure that. But within, you know, finding out how to direct someone when they're not acting with another person and they're having to watch and take in a performance and then put that same performance out, sort of match it emotionally at the same time, you know, doing kind of this karaoke style, you know, dubbing thing like ADR.
Yeah, it's a whole nother job.
Else.
Yeah.
It's a whole other job.
Yeah.
And facilitating them and like creating a space where they feel comfortable. You know, a lot of these shows are dramas or like over the top comedies. So there's so much happening, you know, and trying to figure out how not to give a line reading, but to help them get to where they need to get. You know, it's a whole other muscle. There's so many things about being a director that are exciting and wonderful and logistical. It's like creative logistics or something. It's about having a vision and then being able to deliver that vision in a way that everyone is able to do their job. You know, the DP, the costume designer, the actors, the editors.
So I know that you started at a very young age, but do you want to tell us what your first gig was, what that first job was, maybe that you got paid for, or whatever works for you?
Well, yeah. I'll tell you my first. So I was 4, and my Aunt Mary is such a wonderful woman, and she's done about 1 million different things. And she and my mom were producing these Hallmark movies together, like in the 80s in Houston. And they did The Little Match Girl. And they needed a voice. Something had gone wrong with the young actress, or I don't know exactly what the story was, but I was 4. My Aunt Mary said, "We'll go to McDonald's. I just need you to come in and do, you know, some of these lines and da 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 da." And it was a narrated piece. But so yeah, my first job was actually like a dubbing job, like an ADR job that I was paid for with French fries.
Hey.
Yeah, which seemed like a fair payment at that age. My first directing job actually was, I was the director of development for a theater in LA called the Celebration Theater from 2011, 2012, which was during that transition time for me. Like kind of, I had finished doing a musical for them, and I fell in love with everybody, and I'm still very much connected to that theater. And then we had this program for young storytellers, young writers, and I directed one of those readings. And that was like the first thing. And then after that, the man that I was dating said, "You should direct this one-woman show." And I shot a little sort of documentary, a mini documentary to go with it. Well, I interviewed a bunch of women in my life about what they see when they look in the mirror, because the play was called "If I Look This Good, Why Do I Feel Like Shit?" And actually, an iteration of it is going up at the Hollywood Fringe this summer.
Awesome.
But I remember directing that mini documentary on my iPhone and then sitting with a friend of mine, Bobby, and editing it and seeing it coming together and falling in love with that process. And that's when I knew. And I immediately enrolled in a course after that called The Art of Visual Storytelling with Miles Watkins. Spent every dime I had to write, produce, and direct 3 short films, which then I used as a reel, which got me a job at Film 14, directing these commercial book trailers, which then turned into shooting everybody in the world's short film, and then getting to shadow in television, and then getting an agent, and then getting the dubbing, and then ultimately the feature. And now I'm a bunch more features coming up. So, but anyway, it's definitely been a process. But I mean, I was carrying C-stands around by myself. You know, I ruined my last car because I would put so much gear in there. It was just like I was cruising, like scraping the streets of LA with this car.
So, what is the best part of your job?
My relationships with the people that work with me. Like I was saying before, you know, growing up and sitting around with a bunch of artists and like listening to them talk, there's nothing better than that. Like you basically just get to build a fort with, you know, like your adult version of a fort with your friends all the time. So
I like that.
I love that. And everyone gets paid in French fries. So
and everyone gets paid in French fries.
I feel like that's the new goal of mine. It's also like you learn to take bigger risks if you're around artists that you trust. So that's the thing that I love about what you're talking about.
You find your people in this industry, you know, if you say, hey guys, I have this idea for this thing, and people are like, yeah, let's make it. And you're literally spending every ounce of energy that you have to do that. You know, those are your people, the ones who show up, who won't let that fail. Yeah. I mean, that's what I love about it.
It's special when you find it.
Yeah, for sure.
What would you say is the most difficult part of your job?
There's an aspect of the job for me that happens right before a project, which kind of goes along with what I was just saying and why the people on my teams are so important, because I think you're like, can I do it again? Can I muster that same amount of energy and creativity and drive to get this done again? And so I think that's where, if I believe in my team, I will always show up for the team. Like, and so I trust that that amount of give is going to be there when I need it. But I think there is an element, that psychological aspect of like, can I do it again? Can I show up again in the way that I have always showed up? And, you know, so far, yes, the psychological aspect is as hard as finding funding. That would be the other. You know, it's like you've got these ideas and they're so great and you have all these ideas and like, how do we make it? But you can always find that. I think learning to trust yourself is the hardest part of being an artist.
So would you be able to talk a little bit about how you've navigated your relationship with that fear and how it's changed over the course of your career?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a muscle. And every time you show up for yourself, and every time you show up for your team, and every time you complete something, you're building that muscle. God, it's so interesting. We were having this conversation last night about, there's some new phrase called a pick-me girl. Do you guys know what this is? Yeah, it's not a part of our generation, but apparently it's like, I don't know. It's kind of a derogatory term for like a young woman who wants the approval of men or something like that, or like internalized misogyny or something like that. And it's really interesting that, because to me, that's so derogatory, because I feel like I was laughing because it was supposed to be a bad thing. And every description, I was like, oh yeah, I used to do that. Yeah, that's, So I think there's an element still for women that comes from women or comes from men or comes from wherever, about not being too much. Don't put yourself out there too much. Don't be too overt. Don't want it so bad. That plays into that psychological stuff, that fear. Oh God, what if I, you know, do too much or say too much or want too much or sing too loud? or laugh too big, or get too excited about my idea. What if I take up too much space? And that all goes into that psychological aspect. And at the end of the day, it's like my mantra is, we're on a rock spinning in the middle of infinity next to a ball of fire. And I will add to that, hurtling through space, a billion miles per hour. And so I'm like, why wait? Why not be the biggest person in the room? Why not celebrate all of your talents? Yeah, I'm 5'4" and I laugh really loud and I talk really loud and I say bizarre things because they just come into my head, and I'm overly excited about everything. I'm a terrible critic because I love everything. So it's like, it's upsetting because there's so much out there that deters young women from being joyfully bold. What's too much when you're spinning infinity? Like, I don't, like, oh, okay. It is always still a struggle. I have these conversations with myself all the time.
I mean, I love that. And I think so much of what you've said, it resonates with me personally. And I know that it resonates with a lot of our listeners, because there is that stigma of like, well, don't ask for too much and be polite. And, and there's that idea of like what it is to be a woman. You have to be liked, you have to be this, you have to be that. You also have to be like twice as good as at your job as, as guys have to be. So,
and you have to be pretty.
And that's the truth. So, I think that there's a lot to be said for taking up as much space as possible. And I think the way that you said that was just so authentic and so lovely. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, my pleasure. I mean, I just, it's talking about being polite, and especially in this country, American women, it's like, when I say pretty, I'm not talking about like bone structure and like hair and all that kind of whatever that means, because that's so subjective. I just mean that there's like this expectation: have your nails done and have you this done and da 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 da, and you dress well and you do this and don't speak with too low a voice, and be really, agreeable, and and I see it now, interestingly enough, doing these dubs where I'm watching these women in France and Italy and Spain, where there's this allowance to be sexual, to be who you are, to be in your body, which is very different, I think, than the way women in this country are taught to be. So that's been a really interesting thing, to kind of look at that agreeableness. The American woman, she's so agreeable, she's so sweet, and so I love female characters like Mayor of Easttown, right? Where you're seeing these beautiful, whole, struggling, alive women, smart women, capable women. So I'm excited for more stories like that. And I think as we grow in this industry, and as other stories are coming into the world in a real way, into a more mainstream way, people are going to start to understand all of this better within themselves.
Completely agree.
Yeah. So the next question is something that Meredith and I think is very important to talk about, especially for young women. And we understand that this is going to be kind of like a range, but if you could talk a little bit about what the average pay is for a director.
It can become an unbelievable amount of money. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't start there, though. Like anything, there are a lot of times, certainly when you're starting out, I didn't get paid anything. And then there are things like the book trailers where there's a range for the type of book trailer, and you you have a certain amount of a budget and your pay comes out of that budget, right? So, but you're given a certain, let's say between $2,000 and $5,000, right? For a shoot that will take place during the day. But you have to create the treatment and you have to cast, and you have to do all that. So it ends up being, weeks of prep and then the shoot day. So you can see how the hours spent, it depends on how you look at it. Are you looking at it as a day rate? Or are you looking at, and you have to pay for the camera, and you have to pay for the space, and you have to pay your actors, and you have to pay for the costumes. And so that $2,000 dwindles. And so you have to learn how to become very efficient with your time, to be very smart about it, and to know what things cost. That's a huge part of being a director. And also paying people what they should be paid. But that's again about building your team, because everybody sort of gets paid more as you go along. But it certainly starts at zero. And then, I'm working towards hopefully directing in television. And, those DGA rates are online to be looked at, and they range, I mean, the 1 hour dramas, that's like a $50,000 gig. That's 3.5 weeks. So that's an incredible payday. And it all varies in between there. And if you're an independent film, my God, if it's something that you love, that you're pouring your heart and soul into, and you're getting it made, and it's not about you getting paid, I don't know, hopefully you make $3,000 for 2 months of work. I don't know. There are certain things that it really is. It's such an unbelievable range, and it's so hard to put. You can't really pin that down, because it is a project to project thing. You learn as you go. And I think that if you learn to trust yourself, and the amount of work that you put in, you begin to learn to ask for what you deserve. And that comes with confidence and experience.
So say I'm a young woman and I'm starting for that first gig. Like, I'm going to be working entry level on a project. And can you talk a little bit about how you know when you're learning and moving toward your goal? And then, which I feel, if you're learning and you're networking and you're benefiting in that respect, that's great. And it's okay to maybe not get paid that much, or not get paid because you're getting that experience. But how do you know when it's time to move on, because you've either learned everything that you're going to learn from that, or like you're being taken advantage of, or how do you navigate that as a young woman?
Well, that's a very intuitive thing. And I think the more podcasts like this, the more conversations we have, young women will hopefully learn sooner to listen to their bodies energetically, to their thoughts. I mean, it's about having an introspective, like, how do I feel right now? Do I feel exhausted? Do I feel respected? Do I feel excited to go to work? Right? These are huge questions. So many young women that I know and love and mentor have PA'd at the highest level, have gotten in as assistants, and they're learning so much, but there's a set, they know on paper, contractually, what they're going to be making. And that's great. I didn't start that way. Now, as a member of Equity, as a stage actor, I knew when I auditioned for something, what the potential pay was. So it was sort of demystified. Getting into independent filmmaking and sort of, creating a path for myself and having no idea, I had to learn, and I'm still learning how to say no to things. Because it's really hard when someone says, I have this idea, and like, can you help me make it? And, well, of course I want to say yes to everything, but it's also about, knowing what's going to bring me joy as well as sustain me, because you can't do anything if you're not sustained. And that means feeling okay about going to the grocery store, having a dinner if you need to go to a work dinner, driving a car in LA, paying your rent, that kind of stuff. And it's such a struggle, and it can be very, very scary. But I think that the big, like flags there are going to be, how do I feel at the end of the day? And how do I feel when I wake up in the morning as it pertains to the job that I'm doing or the relationship that I'm in?
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
of those.
for sure.
It's about listening to your intuitive voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it goes back to that idea of relationships that you said. So that's
Who shows up for you
wonderful.
is a huge thing.
Is there anything in this industry that you feel needs to change, and how do you think we can change it?
The knowledge about things that's the most important thing, is like demystifying this stuff and creating space for new stories, creating space for people. On my sets, there's no cruelty. It just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't fly. I'm very aware of that, right? When you're making something, it should be a collaborative, for the most part, joyful experience. It's a lot of work, but it doesn't have to feel bad. I don't like the cattiness. I don't like the overly critical. I don't like any of that. I want everybody to feel seen and excited, and that what they have to say matters. So that's one of the ways in which but I try to live my life that way, and hearing new voices and supporting diversity. That's just the best thing.
So Nell, what is the best advice that you've been given, or the best advice you could give our listeners for a career in this industry?
Early on, I would get so frustrated when I was directing something and I had this vision in my head, and then it didn't look like how I had envisioned it. And I would be upset, and then I would go away. And then, months later, I'd go back and look at it and go, oh, it's still, So I think that for me, what I always tell myself, being an artist, being a director, being a human being, is 90% falling in love with things the way they are, not the way you envision them to be. Because having a plan is incredibly wonderful and is the most important as you go into something, but still honoring the way it turns out and falling in love with that. I think that's the key to success and happiness, because if you've done everything you can and, your location fell apart, or the camera broke, or like, for instance, on my last shoot, the grip truck got totaled, and then you don't have any gear in the desert, you still fall in love with what you make, because you make it in the way that I guess it was destined to be made. So why be upset about it? Be happy that you did it, that you were able to complete it. It will never be done that way again.
Yeah, I think that's great advice.
There's so many variables that you can't necessarily control every single thing that happens on set. This is a thing in filmmaking. It kind of takes 3 turns, and you have the writing, then you have what happens on set, what you get, and then editing process. So
yeah,
it takes a turn, and it will, and you can't control everything, but you have to be happy with the choices that you've made and what you've created. So
absolutely.
Who has influenced you? Directors, films? Do you have favorite films, favorite directors?
So many. I mean, so many. I mean, I'm a Spielberg baby. Like I grew up, that's how old I am. Those are all the movies of my life. Like, just the most amazing stuff. I was very influenced by Stephen Sondheim and his lyrics, and so for West Side to come out now with Spielberg and Sondheim, like, I mean, come on. But yes, I mean, there's so many. I just love stories. I think Spike Jones is amazing. Michelle Gondry. The people in my life inspire me. But yes, I don't know that I could even say one. I walk outside. I'm inspired by the guy that I told you about earlier in New York who just laid down in the middle of the intersection. What's his story? Who knows? He'll probably come into a script of mine in like 5 or 6 years. But I just, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Silence of the Lambs. Oh my God, there's too many.
It was definitely a tricky one to throw you at the end of at the end of the interview. Well, Nell, thank you so much for joining us on 101. Listeners, thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing.